Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've just been to see Little Women.
Yes.
The new one. There've been so many.
Yes.
And you've watched a bunch of them recently.
I have. I've watched the 1933 version, the 1949 version, and then the Gillian Armstrong version, which I think is 94.
It is.
So I've watched all of those three over the Christmas holidays. So
that's George Cukor in 1933.
Yes, it's wonderful.
Mervyn LeRoy, 1949, and Gillian
Yeah.
Armstrong directed 1994 one.
That's right. So I want to know what you think, because, you know, I have seen so many versions.
Yeah.
And I've actually got a lot to say, but you haven't. So
I couldn't be bothered to watch any of them. I thought, fine, I was looking forward to this. Really looking forward to it. I didn't know the story. I'd heard the phrase "Little Women" so much, but I didn't know the story. I'd never read the book. Never seen any of the other versions, and the title was interesting to me. The title is interesting, you know, like Little Women. Like, is it sort of saying, "Oh, they're just little women. Like these are just their little problems," like in a sarcastic way, clearly, because it's about them.
Yeah,
you know?
well, the book makes that clear.
But also because it's like they're young women growing into adulthood.
Yes, they're children who have the responsibilities of women, or who are behaving like women.
Yeah, and so it's set.
The father says it with pride.
Yeah, so it's set during the Civil War in America. Is it upstate New York?
I think wasn't it Massachusetts somewhere. I thought.
Oh, is it? I didn't actually quite get exactly where it was set.
New England.
Certainly. In a lovely sort of fairly idyllic kind of small town sort of area. Big houses surrounded by lots of pastoral land. It's that kind of thing going on. And it's about these four young women and their mother. And I think the film really successfully kind of separates the attention between the women. Maybe Beth doesn't get quite enough attention, but the others, I think it kind of shares the attention around quite successfully.
It's an ensemble piece, really.
Certainly. I loved it. I thought it was great. And and by the time it gets to the end, when things are starting to wrap up very nicely, it starts to feel very convenient how it does that, and how everyone kind of ends up in a very happy place. But then the film, you know, is also undercutting that slightly with the book publisher character played by Tracy Letts saying, "This is how people want their stories to end. This is what sells." And I think actually Greta Gerwig, the director, maintains the tone of that brilliantly, because things remain very moving while also pointing out to you exactly what is happening in a kind of metatextual sense, which I think was quite successful. It could have undercut it completely.
Yes.
And ruined it.
I was very moved. And I think the film is an extraordinary achievement of tone, actually. You know, because everything works and it's very funny. And I was very moved from the moment that Beth went to hug Laurie's grandfather to thank him for the piano. Yeah. From that moment on, I think, you know, my eyes were in a tide, swelling, falling, and rising, right? So I never actually cried, but, you know, you're in that area from that moment until pretty much the end of the film.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So I think that's an extraordinary achievement, because, you know, so little moves me honestly. And actually, I think, to me, this was the most moving of all the versions that I've seen. You know, I was playing a game in my head thinking, you know, what would be your ideal cast? You know, because I do think that, like, for example, Katharine Hepburn is so extraordinary in the 1933 film, and George Cukor's direction is so wonderful, and I really feel that film brings up the feel of the Civil War. The Civil War is implanted in that narrative, in that version, right from the beginning, right? You know, so all of the want, the men going away, the women on their own, like, it's all situated within a state of war, you know, which is also a kind of a state of war for principles. And actually, I think that this is something that I initially found missing in the film, you know, but then you have that wonderful little scene with Marmee where she puts that extra scarf into the bag, you know, of a man going to visit his dead sons. I think the extraordinary thing about this film that is really, I would say, very considerably different than all of the others is that in all of the others, the narrative is linear. And this mixes in the past and the present. And actually, the whole film begins when Joe is already in New York, which actually is something that only happens like 3/4 or 4/5 into the narratives in all of the other versions, right? So this kind of mixing together of past and present with all of the sisters, and the elegance with which the film does it, because it almost doesn't cue you in, right? It trusts you to be able to follow it, kind of, properly. I think that's really quite a departure and quite amazing.
It does it a little bit with lighting cues or colour grading, I noticed. Remember when we watched the report recently about the Iraq torture report? It was very obvious when you were going to the past because things were kind of sepia toned or orange toned, and then they weren't in the future. It was more cold colours. Similar thing going on with a lot of this, particularly when you go back into their old house when they were younger.
Yes.
The colour changes. But for the most part, no. And there were one or two points where I was slightly confused at exactly where we were. Not so much whether we were in the past or the present, but when we were in the past, exactly where in the past. Because particularly the Timothée Chalamet character, the one who... what's the character's name? Laurie. Who is the sort of young friend who he's involved with the whole family, really, and he's a kind of family friend. He kind of pitches up in everyone's lives at certain points, and that was a little disorienting at one or two points. But for the most part, I agree. I think it's incredibly smooth. I mean, we were thinking recently, when we were talking about Scorsese and The Irishman, about how smoothly he narrates his films, and how things move so smoothly, and you don't really question where you are at any point. And I think that's a real achievement here.
Yes.
That actually... energy carries things through, particularly early on when you have these wonderful scenes set in the house with all the girls talking over each other and you can hear everybody, but there's very little space between each of the lines, so people are just talking and talking and talking, and everyone's got something to say and everyone's got a comment, and there's so much activity. And then later on it's you get these more sort of the cross-cutting between Bet's present day illness and the illness she had in the past, to the point where you have match cuts between shots, the exact same shot from the present and from the past.
Yeah, in the usual narrative, it's the same illness. It's just, that she's expected to die and then she doesn't die, right? But then kind of...
In this one, it's an illness that she gets over and then returns.
Well, I mean, the narrative is kind of almost the same, but the way that it's shown here, it might give the impression that it's a different illness that she dies from, whereas in fact, it's the same one.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the men first? Before we talk about the women, because the men have been a central problem in almost all of the other versions, right?
Okay.
They're really thankless roles. If you see the other versions, they're dullest dishwater the men, right? Because the narrative's focused on the women.
Yeah.
So, and I want to say that because I want to signal, what a great job Greta Gerwig has done, because first of all, they're all eye candy in a way, all of them, which is not the case with the other versions, and I think that's very interesting. Certainly not the case with the versions directed by men, which is really interesting. But here they all are, and they're all thankless roles. Yeah, kind of. The professor is normally a completely thankless role. The husband, the tutor of Laurie, Meg's husband. Completely thankless role, and then of course Laurie, which I think Timothée Chalamet makes it marvelous, right, in a way that it isn't in any other version. I mean, I did think in the 1994 version Christian Bale plays him, and I thought that is Christian Bale's one charismatic performance, right, because he's very charming in it, right. It's kind of, you can see the fun and why he's attracted to the family and so on. But Chalamet is coltish. He's playful. He's a real sort of fop, just playing around, living his best life, and to a point where I think I had questions about, do they like this guy? Do they think he's a prick? Do they like him in spite of themselves? Because he is kind of someone who really seems to have no responsibilities or anything like that, and he's born into a rich family and he's going to be all right, and he's able to just kind of interact with this family in a really playful way. He doesn't, and it's only later on that I really started to feel that the love he has for certain characters and the love they have for him was really real. Oh yes. I mean, maybe I just expected that because I read the books as a child and I know the story and I've seen so many versions, but I mean, what Laurie loves is what he doesn't have, which is that family. And the interactions between the family and security. I mean, he loves every member of the family, including the mother and everything, right?
Yeah.
And the aunt and so on. So, you can see what he's taken with is that, that love of, that's expressed by family first, right? And so then the thing that develops with Joe and Beth, is something different, and I suppose it's part of growing up. But I think he does wonderful things, Chalamet, as an actor. Initially, I thought, this is not going to turn out well. But then he does surprising things, like even in Long Shot, where, he's walking through a meadow and he does like this football backward kick with something, right? Like, just kind of adding a touch, right, to the character in this walk. It's really brilliant. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, I love the way he gets up on the stage
Yes.
when he's with Amy, and he wants to be the last portrait she ever paints before she gives up in that dramatic.
Yes.
And he gets up on stage with this flourish.
And he stretches one leg.
Exactly.
And it's quite sexual in a way, that image, right? Like he's putting himself on stage for her. So I thought that was good. And you remember the film we saw, Mourir à 20 ans, the French film, which was all about May 68?
Oh,
In the Now, or in the Something Now.
In the Intense Now?
Yes. Okay. I'm only mentioning it because the actor who plays Professor Bear, Louis Garrel, is the son of the director of that movie.
Oh, right.
That's all. and he's a very he's quite a famous French star, right? Who's done kind of a lot of musicals. He's anyway. He was lovely, I think. In a role that is really normally very heavily cast by kind of more elderly actors. Anyway, I don't want to dwell too much on that because this is Little Women, Not Little Men. But I just wanted to point out kind of what an achievement those normally thankless roles, what an achievement it is to kind of get so many effects from them and to cast them so well, and to get the actors to perform so well in them, actually.
And the other man I would mention is Tracy Letts, who I love, who isn't that significant in the film. He's the book publisher who you see 3 times. He's the one who we're introduced to at the start when Joe goes to try and sell one of her stories, and he's fairly dismissive in certain ways. And then again, when she tries to sell her novel, they have a conversation, and again, he's fairly dismissive in certain ways. And then he's incredibly dismissive of his wife at the kitchen table. Yes. And it's a pure sort of... It's everything I want from Tracy Letts. I love the man, and I love how sort of pompous he can be, and that's exactly what he's given to do here.
I thought Chris Cooper was also very good.
He was cracking. Yeah. I really liked him. You get real transparency of emotion out of him.
Yes.
The loss that he's had in his family. Yeah. And how much he loves Beth.
Yeah. He was very moving. So actually, and these are all, in a way, the most insignificant characters in the film, right?
Yeah.
So I thought it was kind of, interesting to kind of move in from there. I was initially quite disappointed in Saoirse Ronan. I mean, she's a beautiful actress. Like, both, So one of the things the film says she's playing, to me, she's an absolute beauty, really. And of course, she's absolutely emotionally transparent. I think she's such a great actress, really. But, having seen Hepburn, whom I just think is so extraordinary, because Hepburn in the 1933 version, she's a real tomboy, right? Kind of, so she's both romantic, she's always overly flouncy, and also overly tomboyish, right? So it's got this clash of in her that is also kind of very New England and kind of very Yankee and a real kind of New England spirit there, which I don't think Saoirse Ronan evokes to me. But then she won me over,
How?
It was interesting because I thought the haircutting scene. So one of the things about watching so many versions of these films is you can name the scenes, right? The return of the professor, the trip to Paris, Joe being told off by the aunt for reading, right? Those are just moments that every version has. The drawing of the school teacher that gets Beth in trouble.
Amy
in trouble, right? Those are all moments and they're all scenes, and every version has them. So in a way, you're looking to see how they play. I thought it was very interesting because the moment where she cuts her hair in this version was almost thrown away. In the other films, it's like a major thing, right? It's she sacrificed her beauty and her femininity and her social passport and so on. I mean, here it's just she's got her hair.
Yeah. Well, the family overreacts to it, but it doesn't carry with it all that sense of you've changed your place in society because of this.
Yes, Greta Gerwig turns it into a joke, right? With Amy saying, "Your only beauty" or something, right? Yeah, right. So, but I think, she began to win me over in several scenes, actually. Like, so when she returns back from New York, the death of the sister, the burning of her book, and her response to it, the scene where she turns down Laurie, I thought she was very fine in that, really. So, yeah, I still think, actually, to me, there's nothing tomboyish about Saoirse Ronan's Jo.
No, but in comparing it to the Katharine Hepburn one, like that's something that they were going for then. Is that something they're going for here? Do you think that's something they should have been going for here?
I think for me, like, having read the book as a child, like, part of Jo's character is that she's really driven, like, and she's a young girl in a man's world, where only men are allowed to do certain things, and so her tomboyishness is part of her drive, right, and kind of part of how she succeeds in doing and what she ends up doing. So for me, that tomboyish willfulness, kind of almost take no prisoners, actually, a kind of a fierceness, is something that I don't get from.
Do you think there's an effort though in this one then to communicate those aspects of her character, but in a more feminine way, to reduce that tomboyishness, which would speak to a masculinity of some
sort? I think the film makes those points about the condition of women differently. And obviously we live in a different culture and they need to be made differently. I mean, I think, for example, that the 94 version, I saw it recently, and some bits of the film seem like a little bit of a feminist track. Like, they don't sit comfortably. Like, they feel a bit, they feel preachy rather than the dramatizing of something. I think in this film, it's much more lightly handled and much more cleverly handled, and handled with much more fun. So arguably, it's much more ingrained in this film than in the Gillian Armstrong version, but with a less dampening effect.
This does have one or two moments where it a couple of characters are given monologues, short monologues, but monologues about the state of women and what women, particularly Amy's, when she's speaking to the Laurie character, and she says, "This is what women are expected to do, and you can live like this because you're a man. It's easy for you, but I have all this on me."
I know, but for me, it doesn't just seem like a speech, because actually it becomes part of the dynamic with Laurie.
I agree.
So
I think that worked really well.
Yes, I think so too.
Because for the reason that you say. What did you make of Meryl Streep?
Well, the thing is that the 1933 version has Edna May Oliver, who is like this old actress who's really funny. She's really cantankerous. She's really tall and bony. And again, you get this sense of like a kind of a New Englander, even though I think she might be British actually. But you really get a sense of like a no-nonsense, like, slightly angry, but also basically loving, but willful and cantankerous and bossy person. And she is absolutely funny, right, throughout. So I love that performance in the 33 version. Meryl Streep is great, but to me she still also doesn't evoke that kind of, brittle, self-involved, with a slightly nasty edge, but basically loving her family but wanting to dominate them all. Like, I
didn't get a sense from the Meryl Streep character in this really that she loves her family. Actually, I get the feeling that love wouldn't seem to be the appropriate word. Like, I mean, she wants them to be successful, and she wants them to secure their place in society and secure their fortunes and so on. But you don't get a feeling of emotional attachment between her and her family, I don't think.
Yeah, well, I think that's more the script's fault than Meryl Streep's fault, though.
I got the sense. I mean, it was also a bit of a comic turn because it had a sense of the Maggie Smith character in Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
The older one who always got something to say and is acerbic about everything, and she's got a lot of good lines.
Yes.
Particularly when she leaves the wedding and she hasn't got a nice thing to say about anybody.
Yeah.
But I suppose I also like how the family handles that. Like, none of them gets incredibly offended that she's behaving the way she is. They kind of know, this is what Auntie's like.
Yes.
Which probably keeps that moment lighter than it could otherwise be.
Yes.
But I didn't think it was entirely set. I mean, you can see all the ticks and not ticks, but you can see all the little flourishes and looks that she's giving
It's
her
a performance.
But it didn't feel huge. It didn't feel as sort of ingrained or kind of in her body as I would have liked.
And actually, it's particularly pointed because she often has scenes with either Saoirse Ronan, who really is like a miracle of an actress. Really, she's so transparent. You really feel, or you get the feeling that you're sensing everything that she's feeling. But also, Florence Pugh, who is, I mean, I think she's the revelation of this movie. Because I think she steals the whole movie, actually. And I think it's quite something to steal the movie from Jo March.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt that way.
Not exactly, but although I liked her. I mean, the attention is still always on Jo, and I didn't feel that Amy stole a scene. So how did you...
She got laughs from everywhere. She had like this kind of rage that you felt it was like a real person, like when she was angry, right? So the thing of the burning of the book and... Like, everything she does is believable, including her kindness, right? She seemed to be, like, pulsing with life in a way that, for example, Meryl Streep wasn't, there was kind of like an anger and love and, pride. And, like, I think she brought it all out. Like, including that scene with Laurie, which was marvelous. Like, I'm not going to be second best, right? All of those. I thought she was, like...
you're right.
Extraordinary, really. But this is a film of very good performances. I mean, I don't want to fault anyone because Saoirse Ronan is wonderful. But I mean, for me, kind of, the person who really brought life and so on was really the Florence Pugh character. And I mean, I think it might be worth saying that the worst performance, or the less... I mean, it's not an irritating and it's not awful or anything. But, the worst performance was Emma Watson's, who I found very mannered.
I never believe Emma Watson in anything.
Oh, well,
I mean, that sounds like I'm being, I don't know, reactionary or just unfair. But it's true. I always see Emma Watson doing things. I never feel like Florence Pugh was her character, And I never get that from her, even as Hermione. And I think part of the problem is that, I probably still see her as Hermione to a bit because that was who she was for 7 years or 10 years or whatever.
I thought she was very good in The Bling Ring, and also I saw was she in The Perks of Being a Wallflower, or am I confusing her with someone else? Know. Anyway, I've seen her in another kind of teen film where I thought she was very good. So, but here,
Beauty and the Beast.
She was very good in that. I thought,
but wasn't it mannered though in the same way?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think here
I feel like she plays types instead of people. That's how she comes across to me.
Well, I mean, here she comes across as very mannered and predictable. All her line readings and her responses are predictable, and one-dimensional. So I thought she was a disappointment. But she was the only one. I thought Laura Dern was fantastic, actually, and in a role I would not associate with her.
Why is that?
Because I see her through David Lynch films, or playing like brittle bitches in Little White Lies, or kind of this kind of matriarchal kind of loving, figure and so on. Is not something that I would have thought would have been within her range, and she was brilliant.
I thought she actually had an interesting kind of maternal edge in Star Wars Episode 8, when she played Holdo, the purple-haired...
She was very good in that as well.
Because I think that's one of the reasons that people hated her, was because basically she was playing like your mum. you know, or your mum's mate.
Your
Who's
mum
basically
with
saying
pink
you
hair.
can't go and play. You know, you sort of follow the rules. I think, you know, she had an interesting, but also there was a slightly brittle edge to that as well, with her having to tell the characters not to do things and stuff, and be a bit of a boss, which she's not so much here. She's a friend of her girls as much as a mother.
Yes. She's got a real warmth.
I mean, they don't call her mother, do they? They call her Marmy.
Yes.
Is that a word for mum, or is that?
Was their word for mom? It's
Yeah.
like a family thing.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I love the moment that Greta Gerwig gives her when she returns home at Christmas, and everyone's having a fuss and they're rehearsing a play, I think, and she just stands in the hallway when she comes in and looks at everyone, and they haven't seen her, and she has this moment of like, it's a weird moment of like composing herself, or just having like a second of peace before she knows it's all going to start kicking off because she's home, and then she says "Merry Christmas, everyone," and then but it does all kick off. And I thought that was a really interesting little moment. I think the film has a lot of little moments like that are just little character moments that speak to. You just get a feeling of a rich life. For instance, when Chris Cooper listens to Beth playing the piano.
Yes.
And, you know, and he sits outside on the stairs, and he cries. And it's not like it doesn't make any sense. He loves the music, and it reminds him of his daughter, and she reminds him of his daughter in particular. And it's just for him. And he's promised her, you know, no one will be listening to you, but of course he is.
That's a credit, I think, to the director. You know, because in other versions, the focus is on Beth playing, right? Whereas here, it begins with Beth playing, but then the focus is on the grandfather listening, and his response. So the reason why we feel he's remembering his daughter and the blah 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 blah, and you know the loss of it, and you know, is because because the camera's on him, and also because Chris Cooper delivers on that, so to speak. Yeah, but it's an interesting accent that, you know, that the accent could have been on the child's pleasure in playing the piano, rather than you know, the man's pleasure, but also sadness and loss in hearing the playing.
Yeah.
I thought that was very good.
And so Chris Cooper's character has just this very low level B plot, you know, that goes underneath the whole thing that isn't necessary for any of the main stories to be told, but you feel it every time he's on screen. You just understand this character. You understand, and that is down to, as you say, the director, the script, the acting sheet that Greta Gerwig chooses to put on him, and the performance, and it's one of these things where you just get this rich sense of who this man is.
Yes.
And again, he's entirely believable. It's like a side dish to everything else.
Some sequences seemed to me either underlit, or the projection system wasn't luminous enough, or I initially thought, oh, what's wrong with the projection system here? It's not luminous enough. But then there were scenes outside that are just like breathtakingly luminous and beautiful, right? Like, you know, so the scenes at the beach, right, were like glorious. The scene of the two sisters just reading with each other outside, that was, you know, beautiful. The skating scene, brilliant and beautiful. So then it makes you wonder, why so many other scenes seem just grey and underlit?
I mean, I didn't notice that, so I don't know.
Right.
I suppose the scene of the kiss between Joe and what's his name, the professor,
Professor Bear,
was going for a silhouetted romance. I don't think it delivered. You know, I think it was going for something beautiful that it didn't quite capture. But no, I didn't think of anything particularly too dark or too washed out or anything. I loved actually the shots of Timothée Chalamet and Joe dancing outside the party.
That was wonderful.
And there are these beautiful tracks that go alongside, and so in the background you can see through the windows everyone dancing inside, and then in front of them, you know, kind of jumping past the windows, are the two of them, and there's this contrast of light and dark there, because the light's coming through the windows, but you can see these guys outside in the moonlight. That was lovely, and actually that had a sense as well of remember in The Favourite, the dance scene in The Favourite where they're doing these silly modern dances to classical music. Well, it's not as mannered as that here, nor is it as, you know, they're not actually doing specifically silly modern dances. But, you know, when they kind of let loose and no one can see them, that has the sense of breaking out of.
It's very playful,
all of that kind of social constraint they're supposed to have on them.
I thought, so, because you can't help it when you're watching comparing people. And I thought, for me, until watching this film, Christian Bale, was the best Laurie. But then there was that beautiful scene outside where Joe turns him down, right? And he's just so fantastic in that. And actually, that is so beautifully lit, right? Kind of, with the focus, there was so much of the focus on his response to that, right? Like on how he's hurting. Anyway, that's an aside.
The way that was shot struck me, and I couldn't work it out. That the way that he's shot is with it's from an angle that's just above him.
Above him, yeah, it's looking slightly down.
Down on him, and you can't tell exactly why, because it's not really her point of view that the camera's showing you. But also, it wouldn't feel right if it were on his eye level there somehow. No. Like he feels downtrodden, ashamed in a way, or kind of beaten in some sense.
Also, you get the sense of his feeling, but whilst he's trying to hide his feeling, because actually you're often looking down on his eyes. Yeah. So, you only partially see his eyes a lot of the time. So I thought that was a brilliant choice of angle, really.
So I suppose I'm keen to think of it more. Or keen to ask you more about the differences between those previous versions and this one, because particularly in the sense of the worlds into which these films were put, or the worlds in which they were made. So you've talked about, or I asked you about the sense of Joe not being as much of a tomboy, and is that related to the kind of women that the film is speaking to today, as opposed to the women they were speaking to in 1933. Can you think of other sort of...
Well, I think what struck me really in the 1933 version, for example, the 1933 version, was at the height of the Depression, right? And it was like a sociological phenomenon, the film. It was like King Kong. Actually, I think King Kong, Mae West, and Little Women were the big hits of the year. And the worst year of the Depression. So things like, the kindness to the neighbors. So, the poor neighbors are immigrants. They're German in the original, right? And so the sharing of the food and that sense of community and the, getting through bad times together, in a moment of social crisis is very much a part of the 1933 version. The 1949 version, very interestingly, makes a big deal about scenes that are not in this one. So one of the scenes that appears in almost all the versions except this one is when it's Christmas, and the girls, instead of spending the money on themselves, sacrifice it and buy something for the mother. In the 1949 version, that's a whole scene. So, the girls go to the shop, and they choose their ribbons and papers and clothes and, perfume, whatever they want for themselves, right? And then they go home, and then they go back to the shop and exchange everything, to buy something for the mother. So, this idea of post-war American prosperity, and it's very interesting. And as I said, what struck me about the 1994 version is the accent on the role of women in society, which is kind of stated in the other versions, but not really, right? So, for example, in the 1933 version, the main thing about Jo is she doesn't want to break up her family. So anybody intruding on the family, she sees as an enemy, right? So, the resistance to the tutor marrying her sister and all that stuff is, she doesn't want to break up her home, which she's so comfortable in, right? In the 1949 version, I don't even think there's much made of that, to be honest, really. Like, the gender roles are so kind of taken for granted. Like, I think kind of the June Allison thing is, she wants to be a writer and she wants to be famous, but I don't want to over-exaggerate, but there's relatively little that has to do with her being a woman and what that means in society.
Right.
So I think every version is speaking to, to a different context, really.
And so how do you think this one is speaking to its context?
Well, I think this one is speaking through its context very much through a feminist lens, but through a very inclusive lens, right? So there's that moment where the Emma Watson character says, you know, these may not be your dreams, but they're mine, you know, and my dreams are just as valid as yours, and my dream is, you know, to get married and bring up a family, right? Like, you know, so kind of so that's an articulation of that choice that actually never had to be made before. You know, I don't think it ever was made before. It was always taken for granted that was like a woman's role to do that, so it didn't need explaining. Yeah. Whereas now, the fact that it's just as valid a choice as, you know, going off and being a novelist in New York is an interesting kind of...
Yeah, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the women's relationship to their work as well, because I suppose I always had this idea in my head that it was going to be one of these stories about who you marry, and of course it is that to a great extent, but also particularly Joe and Amy have ambitions to be artists.
Yes.
Amy wants to be a painter, and Joe's a writer, and these are, and so their ambitions are kind of, they have these conflicts to kind of manage or try and marry up between what they want to do for their work, what they want to do with kind of their romantic lives, and also the maintenance of their family relationships, and kind of the place they live and this sort of thing. These, I think, they combine in really interesting ways. And the film, I suppose, ultimately, does it feel like it ultimately says you shouldn't have to compromise anything,
no,
despite the fact that they do. They work out ways to make the best of what they have.
Well, I think basically, you know, you can't control what world you're born into, but you have some degree of control of, you know, what you can do within it, you know, but also what world you're born into shapes or helps shape your desires or your But I thought what's very interesting about the film is that all the sisters want to be artists. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. So initially Joe's a writer. Is it the elder sister, the Emma Watson one? You know,
Meg.
She wants to be an actress. Mm. The other one paints. The other one plays the piano, right? Mm. So, but out of all of those, it's only Joe who wants to pursue it as a career, right? Like, you know,
Amy wants to pursue it for greatness. That's what she says. She says, if I can't be great,
yes,
then I want to be nothing at all, which is why she dramatically says, I want to give this up.
Yes. But also, you get the feeling that, you know, what she really wants to be is a society woman. She wants to, you know, have a contented home and be well off and, you know, kind of be a good mistress of the house and be, you know how to paint a little and how to draw a little and, you know, kind of, yeah. So, I mean, her whole identity is not invested in it the way that it clearly is for Joe. Yeah. So you see the development of that as the film progresses.
Mm. I think she takes her aunt's words to heart when, you know, that scene where she's painting away and her aunt says, come in here for a second. Mm. And then she says, you need to marry someone really rich because everyone else is a lost cause.
But she knows that.
Yeah, but that's when she... Is that the turning point for her?
No, because the other girls also know that, but they don't do it. You know, they follow their heart. So
that's what I mean. So that's when she turns the corner from it into actually taking that seriously and going, I have to marry well. You know, because that's something that Joe conspicuously isn't interested in listening to.
But she gives that speech to Laurie explaining, you know, the why of it, right? And then, in fact, it's very interesting because, in fact, she does turn the German guy down. Yeah. Or whatever his name is, right? So, you know, and by that, and at that point, it's not a sure thing that Laurie's going to propose to her, right? In fact, she expects that's over. So she's pragmatic, yeah, but always with following her heart, really. As you can argue are the other sisters, which is also interesting. So this is what I mean when I say I think the film is very inclusive. It has a respect for people's choices that actually are quite different in each instance.
Yeah, I think Amy's interesting because she compromises in a way that Joe isn't willing to, and I think Meg is interesting because she is brought down to earth. I mean, this to some degree speaks to what I was saying about when things start to wrap up in quite convenient ways. So Meg kind of wants all the best stuff, but she can't afford it. Her husband doesn't make enough money. She didn't, quote unquote, marry well enough, which is why her aunt says she's a lost cause. But what ends up in their relationship is she sells this expensive fabric that she bought. She gives up the dream of that dress that she wanted, and you know the last you see of them basically is them embracing and kissing and moving forward with their not enormously wealthy family.
Yes.
Now that's something that could have gone a completely different way and led to another 10 years of drama in their family or a breakup or that sort of thing. So it's something that is a compromise. It's a compromise that she makes for her family that I suppose is believable, but does feel like it's in that wrapping things up nicely.
Well, I think it's very believable. I mean, it's very selfish of her.
It was, yeah.
I mean, kind of, $50 was a huge amount of money in that period, right? It's like, not quite buying a house, but, kind of, people were making $7 a week. $50 for a dress, even if you only bought one a year, is a huge, so huge that actually it prevents him from buying a winter coat, right? And that was only for the material. So I think what that's all about is to show us. I think it's almost the opposite of what you're saying, because it actually shows us this romantic ideal of you married for love. Well, actually, marrying for love has consequences. One of the consequences is that if you want to keep your marriage together, which in this period you have almost no choice about, right? Kind of, you are going to have to make sacrifices. You marry for love and you have no money, and you have to adjust to that. It would have been very easy to say, okay, well, they just marry for love. Because actually, that's another scene that I don't remember in the other films. I don't remember in the other films having to return a dress because you married down, so to speak. Right? So this is something this particular version brings out, the materiality of choices.
Yeah.
I think what I loved most about it, which I forgot to say, and which you don't see in the other films, is that you get a real sense of, so it's part of the tone, but it's a real sense of the interaction between the sisters. Yeah. The way that they argue, the way that they fight, right? Like there's a much more, like the other versions are almost too saccharine. The kind of sisterhood is wonderful. And it's almost like, there's never a problem between them, or the problems are kind of very minor. This one, you get a real sense of like rage and anger sometimes against each other, or sometimes just horseplay that goes a bit too far. There's a real sense of siblings, of real siblings, right? Not just this ideal kind of lovey-dovey. So I love that about this film.
And the other thing I'd say is how believable all the dialogue is. Actually just the words that people say and the way they're saying, because I think sometimes, especially when you're doing dialogue from a different age, in evoking that different age, it can sometimes feel quite stilted. I think one or two of Laura Dern's lines do when she says "it is" or "this is" as opposed to "it's." Where contraction would just feel more natural. Occasionally, she feels a little stilted, but not really very much. And actually, everything people say, even when it's very clearly speaking in the style of a different age, feels really natural.
That reminds me, one of the things about the Florence Pugh character, so all versions up to this one make Amy pretentious, right? Oh, right. So she's always mispronouncing words, trying to be elegant, but actually not knowing what the words are, or saying the wrong word, So I forget concrete examples. But actually in this film they remove that trait, because in other versions it's a way of making fun of the character. Her pretentiousness is used for humor, right? So Elizabeth Taylor plays her in the 1949 version, right? And kind of you're meant to laugh at her, really, for kind of getting, all these words wrong, So I thought that was kind of interesting. Like this film doesn't make fun of its subjects,
it's generous to everybody.
I
think it gives them all a moment, and it doesn't have a snobby word to say about anyone or anything like that.
Yes. All right, so let's wrap it up. We highly recommend that you see it. We really highly recommend that you see it because there's been a real resistance regarding men seeing this film.
Has there?
Yeah, there has. It's like, you know, and actually there've been like polls about it. Like, men just won't go see this film, even no matter that the reviews are excellent, and so on. They just think it's not the film for them, which actually is very misogynist and also kind of untrue. You know, if you go to this film, you'll have a really great time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter. And the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.